This is my second video about the setup of a Delta 12-inch radial arm saw. If you happen to see part 1, then you saw me working through the instruction manual for setup, and it ended with me making a table that didn't turn out to be flat, and so I said what I was going to do was remake the table. But aside from that, everything was put together and some of the adjustments were done to get it ready for use. Well, I've moved backwards a little bit since then. I decided I really needed to take the saw apart and clean it up. The original packing grease, or whatever it's called, from back in 1991 had turned very sticky, and it really seemed like it was going to affect the operation of the saw. So it seemed like the best thing to do was take it apart, clean out that packing grease, get it all cleaned up, and then put it all back together. My other motivation for disassembling the saw was I really want to understand how it works. Radial arm saws do require a lot of adjustments, and I'll be better off in the long run if I really understand all the parts of this saw, how they go together, so that I can make those adjustments. Taking the saw apart was fairly straightforward. In general, the challenges were cases where things were stuck together, and for that I used penetrating oil to loosen things, and to clean up all that sticky grease, I used a degreaser. So at this point, I think I've got everything ready to put back together. I have printed out the instruction manual, as well as the parts list, which includes exploded diagrams of how all the parts go together. I got both of these from the website vintagemachinery.org, which is a great resource, of course, for anyone working with older equipment like this. In a sense, this whole process is about lubrication. Machines have moving parts, and those moving parts need lubrication to make them work well and to protect them from wear and tear. One of the main things I'm doing here is taking the saw apart to remove the lubricant that was used before, and I have to put something else back. So one of the first decisions I have to make is, what lubricant should I use? The choice of a lubricant for woodworking machines is a very contentious topic. The opinions on this run all over the place. Whenever I see a situation where there are lots of smart and experienced people who don't all agree, I tend to assume there's no one right answer. But I do have to make a choice, so I did as much reading about the topic as I could. One of the things I read is this document. It's called the Lubrication Guide for Ensuring Peak Performance of Rockwell Industrial Machines. In other words, this is the vendor's recommendations for lubrication of my saw. And in fact, it covers all kinds of different Delta Rockwell machines. This was published in 1975. And under the section for radial arm saws, their recommendation is dry lubricant. So what is a dry lubricant? Well, let's just briefly mention what it's not. Oil and grease are not dry lubricants. So when we talk about oil, we have the penetrating oil that I used to loosen things during the disassembly of the machine. That's an oil. We have the classic can of household 3-in-1 oil. This can is probably about my age. We have various forms of grease. Here's white lithium grease in the form of an aerosol can. I think I bought this when the tailgate on my pickup truck was stuck. For my tractor lubrication schedule, I use multi-purpose construction and farm grease with a grease gun, because the tractor and its attachment have grease zerks where I can just inject it right in. And then of course there's WD-40, not a grease, but also not a dry lubricant. Some people use these products in woodworking machines of all kinds. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying that's not the choice I'm making. And part of the reason why is because Rockwell says not to. And in fact, if you look a bit further at this lubrication guide that they published, they give a list of dry lubricants, which includes powdered graphite, silicone, Teflon, and hard wax. And I have some of those items here. I have powdered graphite. I have silicone lubricant. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I have Teflon. I have molybdenum. dry lubricant, which I believe is similar to graphite. It wasn't mentioned in their list, but it's kind of in the same category as graphite, so I'll mention it. And they mention hard wax, and so I have a box of paraffin. There are two other products that I have here that are often considered as dry lubricants. One of them is Boshield T9. The other is Bostik Glide Coat. These are both popular for things like jointer tables and the cast iron surface of a table saw. I've had good results using these in a variety of ways, and both of these products have their fans. I do think of them as a bit more proprietary than the other items I mentioned here, in the sense that I'm not sure anyone knows exactly what's in either one of these. But they seem like good products. I'm not sure either of them existed in 1975 when Rockwell wrote this document. Another thing about the document and its 1975 origins is that it mentions silicone, which I showed you. The fact is, silicone has very much fallen out of favor. There's a possibility that it will cause trouble when you're trying to do spray finishes. I think of silicone as the bed bugs of a wood shop. Once they're in, it's pretty hard to get rid of them. I was frankly a little horrified when I discovered a can of this in my shop in preparation for this video. So I decided to let it stay long enough to appear in the video, and I'm going to remove it this evening and banish it from my shop forever. Returning to Delta's document, if you read the asterisks and the footnotes, even though they give a list of dry lubricants, it's fairly clear from those additional notes that they have a strong preference for hard wax, actually. And that has led to a common recommendation on the website owwm.org, which is the sibling site to vintagemachinery.org, which I mentioned earlier. If you ask what lubricant should be used in my situation, a number of folks there will recommend paraffin. And I'll be honest, I find that counterintuitive. And reading over the past discussions on the topic, it appears a lot of people find it counterintuitive. I mean, paraffin? So you're recommending that I trust the lubrication of my precious woodworking machine to a crayon? I mean, paraffin wax doesn't sound very high tech. Surely what I should be using is this molybdenum stuff. It has more syllables. And yet, the fact is, the folks who made this machine recommend hard wax, the most common example of which is paraffin. Once I tried to actively set aside that mindset, those initial reactions, the more I look into it, the more I realize hard wax is a credible choice here. And in fact, it is what the vendor recommends, and a whole bunch of people that are smarter and more experienced than me say it's not merely a credible choice, it's the best choice. So, bottom line, that's the choice I'm making. I'm gonna go with paraffin for this project, and we'll see how it goes. And as it turns out, I get to use my giant paraffin bar right away, because one of the first things I want to assemble is the motor yoke assembly. So this is the yoke of the saw, and this is the motor, and the motor, which is heavy, is going to go right in here. And this is the front trunnion, it's called. And these holes, basically, it attaches to the motor like this. And then what's going to happen is that this fits in here. And it's a rather tight fit. And this mechanism allows the blade to be tilted. Normally it will lock in place at 0 degrees, but if you want to change the angle, you can tilt it by rotating it like this. So all these surfaces here are examples of a place where we need lubrication so that this can rotate freely without causing too much wear and tear. And my understanding is that the way you apply this paraffin literally is to just rub it on. The guidance for using paraffin suggests that for situations where the fit is very tight, you don't want to put on too much. And this is definitely one of those examples. This front trunnion, when it slides in here, the tolerance is very fine. So I've intentionally put on probably too much paraffin here for the fit. And I'm going to slide this in. And when I slide it in and rotate it, because of the paraffin, I no longer feel or hear that metal on metal. But at the same time, the fit is pretty tight. So in this case, I'm probably going to wipe a little bit of it off, because what I want to end up with is a fairly thin coat of paraffin. So in the next video, I'm going to go ahead with the assembly of the motor into the yoke with this front trunnion. Once that's done, I will immediately have another lubrication point here, because the yoke is normally in this orientation, and this top surface is where the roller head goes, and it rotates as well. So I'll be lubricating this connection between the roller head and the top of the yoke as well.